Well, today I sit down with a sex therapist on finding traction, and I find out that everything I've been telling you is wrong. Well, not quite, but I did learn some things, and a couple things helped modify some of my positions and some of my thinking around the relationship between porn and sexual intimacy. So, welcome to that conversation on finding traction.
Guys ready?
When it comes to porn, are you stuck, spinning out, or slipping backwards in your life? If so, then welcome to the Finding Traction podcast, a show dedicated to those who are looking to gain recovery momentum away from porn and toward the life and relationships they have always hoped for. Now, here's your host, Vern Tomke.
Well, anyways, I want to welcome Monica Cook to the podcast, Finding Traction. Monica, it's great to have you all the way from Sydney, Australia. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, and I want to, your credentials are a sex therapist, and that would always be an interesting, I'm not sure if it would be a conversation starter or stopper at a party. So how did that come about? And just tell me a little bit of how you got interested in that area.
Yeah, sure. So my background is actually in science communication and science education. And I was working in a children's hospital. And at that point, I realized there was this huge gap in our education, this sort of between what is researched out there in the sexual realm and in the fertility realm, actually, and what gets out there to people. And I had this huge passion just to fill that gap because I could see that we were doing a good job in education and diet and, smoking cessation, all these other areas. Yep. But then there were these two huge areas of health that we just weren't doing well in. So I actually started off in the fertility realm, helping people understand their own bodies and, particularly women when they're fertile and the like. And as I started working with couples, I got a whole heap more questions about sex than I did even about fertility. And I realized actually these two areas go together closely. And I really wanted to be able to help them tangibly. Okay. So I went back and did a master's in psychosexual therapy and then came back into the realm as a sex therapist and have been working in that area ever since. And it's just expanded my horizon of understanding people, understanding myself. It's been just this amazing journey, but it really did start from realizing that there was this huge gap in what was out there in terms of education in the sexual space. Yeah.
So is it a conversation stopper or starter at a party?
It can be both. It depends on who I'm talking to.
Yep.
And if it is a conversation stopper, I'll often sort of, respect that in people because, it's sort of, people have to be ready to go there. But when it is a conversation starter, it can really lighten up the mood a lot, and you can get some very entertaining banter happening.
Absolutely.
People opening up. Yeah. So it's wonderful.
Well, and my background is, of course, coming through sexual addictions, in particular, my struggle with porn. And that's what I mostly work with guys in that area. And one of the things, and I'm so glad you're on the show, because in my helping of guys, I have been trying to kind of identify. I know that porn, for example, has been not been good for sexual intimacy and has not been good for our marriage and is not good for most guys' marriages. And I've been trying to put language to that, trying to understand that. And so my first thought is, well, maybe it over pressures or gives a guy stimulates him in terms of his sexual engine. And I love some of your feedback because you said, well, Vern, I'm not sure if that's the case, how porn affects the relationship. So I love pushback, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts as to does porn create an over sexual engine in a guy, or what are you seeing and how would you explain that?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So I think the first thing I wanted to say is just that obviously every person is unique therefore the impact of porn on a person's sexual relationship will also vary greatly.
Yep.
So just sort of holding space for the uniqueness. So what I'll talk about here is obviously a generalization, but it'll differ from you to the next guy. So yeah, sometimes I do see a super inflated engine, that kind of engine that you're talking about, but more often the kind of engine that I'm seeing is an engine that's had its wiring changed so that it can only operate under very specific and limited conditions. So for example, and I think you kind of touched on it in that first bit of, with porn, there's often not a lot of context or storyline behind it. There's a few different features about it. It's super visually oriented. The pleasure is instant. The person in the clip is seen to know exactly how to pleasure their partner without even asking or trying things out. There's continuous novelty and variety. The experience itself is very goal-oriented, particularly for the user.
Yep.
And everything comes to you. So there's nothing that's actually asked of you in that space. And there's also this really interesting emphasis on how the guy is often bringing the woman pleasure. And, whether it be via her face or sounds or other biological responses, there's this huge kind of fixation on that. So people, and particularly guys, are getting used to this sort of sexual arousal. But when they hit the real thing, it can be a real shock to the system, because sex in real life is almost the exact opposite of those things that I've just described. So there is a context, there is a storyline. There happens to be another real unique person in front of you that is also wanting pleasure. And that's a huge unknown factor in the mix. Work, communications required to make it a place of mutual pleasure. So it's not just about one person's pleasure, but a mutual pleasure. And then on top of that, figuring that out actually takes a willingness to fumble. And if you're comparing yourself to what's being considered as stud material on the porn you've seen, there can be a very real fear of failure in attempting this. And so people put very high expectations on themselves and also on their partners to respond a particular way, with the right sound or the right look. And so one of the things I've often said is it's almost like, because porn is so much about entertainment and not so much about education, even though people are going to it for education, watching it is almost like watching Jackie Chan do his kung fu moves and then thinking that is what self-defense actually looks like, and that you can then go and do the same thing, right? It's just not going to work. It's that's not what real defense is. Self-defense, and also trying to copy it is just going to not work. So yeah, and so the other aspect obviously is, comparing porn to real life, is sex in real life is much slower. So the average woman takes up to 20 minutes to be aroused, not 1 minute. Sex with a partner will contain often less variety than your 1 hour of perfectly curated porn that you've set aside for yourself. The experience itself requires a lot of patience, a lot of focus. It's not like an instant hit of pleasure like it is in porn. And actually, real sex is more, the pleasure is actually more in the journey rather than in the orgasm, the end point. Whereas I find that guys that have watched porn for a lot of their time really think that the main point of sex is for them to come and their partner to come, to kind of, that's the point.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so, I'm often bursting a lot of people's bubbles by saying, that a partner can orgasm and actually not have a great experience. It's not about just that end goal. It's about all of that stuff leading up to it. It's the journey. So basically with porn, you're training your brain to receive sexual arousal and give sexually in a way that often doesn't overlap with what's possible when it comes to the real thing. And the outcome of that is actually what I was, kind of telling you before, I think is actually the opposite of what you were saying. The engine dies down a bit, if anything, and it becomes rather deflated. And it's actually hard for guys to get aroused. And that actually creates anxiety in them, because society tells us that men have to feel sexual all the time. And so losing this is scary. It's scary for the guys that I see. And from that experience of fear comes a whole lot of other dysfunction that I then see as well, like erectile dysfunction, ejaculatory issues, low confidence. It's all related. And then interestingly, since this is a kind of podcast on porn, it can actually fuel men then to rely more on porn to
Right.
both receive the sexual satisfaction that they're not receiving in the sexual space,
Yep.
but also to soothe the anxiety that comes about from feeling like this kind of less of a man for not being able to be aroused with a partner or unable to have satisfying sex with their partner. So it sort of fuels a bit of this cycle.
Okay. Let me try, active listening back to you
Yeah,
and
please.
hear what you're saying here. So you're saying it actually is, in one sense, is messing with the wiring in men's mind. It
Yeah.
actually is going to mess with the drive of the engine
Yeah.
and introduce other dynamics into the interplay between the man and the woman. And so it's actually going to decrease some of the healthy sexual drive that's needed to interact with a partner.
Right.
And so you're talking, those other dynamics are things like self-esteem. What are those other dynamics? Just kind of go over those again with me that are kind of being introduced into the system.
Yeah. So I guess, like what you were saying is because they're not being able to go into the sexual space and be prepared for that, they're almost training for a different race.
Right. Yeah.
Then they're going into the sexual space and realizing that they're not set up for this. They've actually, those neurons that wire together fire together. So they've wired together certain neural pathways that then don't overlap into the real experience of sex.
Right.
And so when they hit that speed bump, it can really take a hit on the self-esteem piece.
Right.
And the confidence, and create almost this nervous system flight or fight response, which then goes on to have very physiological effects on the body, which, is expressed as erectile issues and the like. So just touching on the self-esteem piece, if you don't mind, I was wanting to talk about what I really think, because I think there is a supercharged engine that you're talking about. I do see that.
Yep.
But I don't actually think that it's because of porn that it happens. I actually think that the supercharged engine that you're talking about is fueled by a low sense of self-worth that then creates anxiety, and sex becomes that soothing mechanism where they can feel okay about themselves. And so when porn gets involved, either the fantasy of the experience or the sexual release itself actually provides the short-term relief, but in the long run actually perpetuates the cycle of low self-worth that then creates more anxiety and leads them to seek out more soothing, and often in the form of porn. So it becomes that's the cycle that I was talking about. But what can happen is, when a person partners up, right? And finally there's this relief, like, yay, I can be validated through another real person, and maybe I won't need porn anymore. But what happens is they transfer across this same sense of anxiety and insecurity of themselves into the sexual relationship then. And suddenly, this is a really crucial point, they're not wanting sex anymore, they're needing it from their partner, right? They're needing it, especially if they're giving up the porn.
Right.
So when you have a need like this, what you're actually doing is you're expecting your partner to almost take care of your need. And that's not a sexy relationship. That's a patient-carer dynamic there.
And that's the pressurized aspect that you're referring to, right?
Exactly. So there's a huge need. Then the partner also starts to feel like they need to step into that need, which might be fine initially, but then it starts to feel like a chore for that partner. And it becomes less about a mutual experience for both people, and more about how do we meet your need for sex, which is often unrelated to sex. It's more about validation, but it becomes that. And then that's even unsatisfying to the self-esteem of the person that's desperately needing it, because they know that their partner's not really into it, right? Their partner's doing it like a chore, and then it makes them even more insecure about their lovability. So overcharged, supercharged engines are not a bad thing. I see that being a huge gift in relationships, for some couples. But I think what really makes the difference is whether the engine runs off fear and anxiety and insecurity, or whether the engine runs off a sense of abundance and self-worth, where you don't need your partner, but you want them, and you're willing to go after an experience that's mutually satisfying. For me, that's the difference between, whether you get a really interesting, needy pursuer withdrawer dynamic in a relationship, or whether the super engine works.
Right. Well, it's probably not a surprise then that, we've all driven along the freeway and seen a car that's broken down, and they're on the phone, looking for a tow truck. And it's probably not a surprise that many of us have experienced in almost like a broken down sort of bedroom, because of some of these dynamics you're talking about. Many guys I work with goes, it's like our sex life is broken.
Yeah.
And first of all, you made a statement. It was a study that it was really important for me to hear, because you said, if it's broken down, that's really important, because something about if people don't feel good about their sex lives, there was a percentage versus if they feel good. Do you remember that comment? Because it was saying, don't minimize the fact that you feel like your sex life is broken down. It is really important, and it's important to people.
Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it is, as a society, we're very quick to say, oh, it's just one aspect of
Right.
of a relationship, so just ignore it. But I think what that study was showing is that if that piece is not at play in the relationship, it actually takes up a much bigger space of anxiety in that relationship than it would if it was functioning well. If it was functioning well, it would just be like a 20% allocation. But if it's not functioning well, it actually takes up like 50 or 60% of that couple's energy and focus, because it's not functioning well. So it actually becomes a very big deal when things aren't going well in a relationship for a couple.
And that's, I think, as I'm talking to guys or couples, that sometimes is the front of their mind. And so, just talk to me a little bit about, okay, let's say a couple's coming in to see you, and they feel like their vehicle's on the side of the road, maybe steam's coming out of the engine, and they're going, you know what, it feels like some things are broken down. It feels like perhaps things have broken down so much that sex is completely infrequent, or it's almost non-existent. Where would you start with a couple that comes into you and go, man, I don't even know the last time we made love. And it's just like, it's become a battleground between us. And that anxiety you're referring to is just such a part, and both of us leave frustrated. And, that's a huge, there's so many factors. Where do you even start with a couple that comes to you? Because I'm sure everyone starts some point, right?
Right, exactly. And it's really interesting because I often get one partner coming along, either feeling like they're the one that's broken, or the other partner kind of angry and saying their partner is broken.
Right.
But the first thing I would say is actually it's actually because of both. It's a dance that both of them are participating in.
Okay.
So, in some ways, the sexual engine has been turned off by both parties often. So it's this funny relational dance. So I'm not happy to just work with one client. I'll always have the other person come in and see what their part in that dance, the dysfunctional dance, actually is. So, assuming that the people are both dissatisfied with that kind of relationship, because I'm just going to add that there are some couples that sort of hit that speed bump in their later age, and they're just like, that's cool, we're both happy, we're both satisfied, no drama. But assuming that there is this anxiety in the relationship because of where their sex life has landed, the first thing, and I know this is a fairly obvious answer, but the first thing I would be doing is acting as a detective to try and figure out what that obstacle truly is.
Right.
And that's actually what my primary job is detective. I'm exploring all the different corners of their relationship to see what is not actually functioning or what is a bit off. And that could be, I'm asking about biological issues. So I also work with a sexual health clinician who'll look at hormonal levels and, are they on antidepressants? Is there pain in the relationship? All of those are huge factors to whether or not someone's going to happily engage in sex. I'll be looking at whether it's a relational issue. So is someone withholding sex from a place of resentment, or maybe a lack of trust in how they, whether their partner's going to hold a boundary well. So that's another huge area. How do they communicate around the topic? Has it just become this huge elephant in the room that they've not actually been able to talk about openly? And that's just led to avoidance.
Mhm.
I'd be looking at how they, this is a big one actually, is how they sexualize themselves and their partners. So many women in particular have been taught to suppress, particularly religious, from a
Mhm.
religious
Sure.
background, have been
Yep.
taught to suppress their sexual desire because it's seemingly dangerous, dangerous to awaken it prematurely or invite unwanted attention. So anytime they have this sort of sexual desire, they shut it down really fast. They've learned to do that, but they get so good at it that when they finally get into the marriage, they're still suppressing that part of themselves. And then sex becomes primarily about caring for their partner, that dynamic I was talking
Sure.
to you at the
Yep.
beginning. And they leave themselves totally out of the equation, which in the long run is unsustainable and leads to eventually a sort of sexless marriage. So in those situations, I'm really talking to that partner about what's in it for them to go on
Right.
this journey and to unpack their sexuality and their sexual functioning. And I'm
Now,
also
is that
yeah.
like a shame response that they're having from something they picked up from teaching, from their
Sure.
childhood, or something like
Sure,
that?
it could be. It could be. That all interacts with how they're willing to sexualize themselves. You
Okay.
see, that shame, the very existence or the feeling of shame is all about hiding.
Okay.
The fear of actually showing themselves for fear that they might be rejected from the community. That's the purpose of shame, like kind of from an evolutionary perspective, is
Right.
if you feel shame, then you're protected and safe enough to be kept in the community. And not rejected. So
Right.
hide everything, hides.
Right.
And so part of that is if I really show myself sexually, will I be rejected? Will I be accepted? Is this right? Is this wrong? And so shame sits in that space instead.
Okay.
So yeah, there's also psychological components too. So some of my clients by just nature are huge perfectionists. So
Mhm.
they sit under this performance pressure, fear of failure kind of concept that means that they avoid doing it at all because they're so scared of actually stepping into the space and stuffing up. So there's really so many different, and as you said, family of origin, trauma, there's lots of different, really important aspects to this that I am touching on. Yeah.
And I can see why you're saying I need to be a bit of a detective,
Yeah.
because you're right. It's unraveling some of these areas.
Yes.
Are huge. So let me ask you one, just kind of a final question here. Because mostly I work with guys, and sometimes, and different people have used different terms like intimacy avoidant, or some of the guys quit doing porn, or however you want to describe it. And they're told, well, if you do that, you'll have a much greater desire for your wife. And that doesn't always happen. And sometimes the wives say, I still feel like I'm living with a stranger. And it's almost like some of the men just say, I don't even know how to begin to have intimacy with this strange other person in this relationship. So intimacy, like some of those intimacy skills, it's either avoidance or sometimes just a lack of knowing where to start. Do you see that? And how do you work with men that it's not just about not looking at porn, because that still doesn't help them know how to build intimacy with this person?
Right, exactly. And you're right, because I actually think intimacy avoidant guys are really drawn to porn because it provides pleasure without the vulnerability of
Right.
having to give anything in return from,
Sure.
emotionally. And also, as you said as well, in porn, they're not going to see what that intimacy and connection looks like. It's never portrayed or rarely portrayed in
Right.
porn. So they're not even going to be knowing what to do or what that looks like in any form. So for me, when I'm working in that space, honestly, I have to go right back to childhood. There's, a famous relationship therapist. I'm sure many of your listeners will know her, Esther Perel. She says that, tell me how you were loved, and I'll tell you how you'll make love. And I love that because it actually,
Wow, I've never heard that. I'm totally unfamiliar with her and that saying, but that's profound.
She is amazing. She is an amazing therapist. If you get a chance, listen to her podcast on Where Shall We Begin?
Okay.
It's actually kind of in the therapy room with her clients, and she is a sort of, she does a lot of sex stuff as well, you know, talking to them about sexual dynamics. And I agree with her. I think if as a child intimacy meant losing some part of yourself for the sake of the family dynamic, so instead of the energy going from parent to child, it went from child to parent.
Right.
That actually trains a person to be scared of intimacy because it's costly. And so you avoid it at all costs to kind of protect yourself moving into your other intimate relationship when the time comes. So that's one reason why guys might be hesitant to actually be vulnerable emotionally, because of what it meant in their childhood. The other part of that is sometimes guys just also come from extremely stoic family culture, like a family that just believes that emotions are a sign of weakness, and this is just how we do it in our family. So there are kind of these two different, avenues of intimacy avoidant. And this is actually some work done by Terry Real, which is my kind of training as well in relational therapy. And so the first step in my work is actually taking them right back to childhood to figure out where their hesitation around being vulnerable actually sits. Because once they get that, then they have to choose whether or not they're going to make a change towards vulnerability, or the cost of staying in that relational position, should they choose not to change. So I need buy-in from them before I can teach them the skills of what it means to be intimate.
So just having them say, well, that's just the way I am, that's not going to be the sort of language you want to hear.
No, and I mean, I'm happy to hear it, but I'll say, and how's that working out for you and your family?
Got it.
How's that? How is that to sit in that with your father? And do you want that for your child? Right. So what's your relationship now with your father like? So you're kind of getting them to see the cost of being invulnerable in a relationship, and you're getting them to see the cost of what it looks like they're seeing me for a reason, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But they've got to see that for themselves. And once that drops, once they realize, okay, I might be wired this way, or this is how I was brought up, or this is why I'm reluctant to do it. Once they get an understanding of that, they also have a path forward. So, and then from there, then I'm actually teaching them skills of intimacy, what it looks like to do that active listening and to listen to someone's emotion without fixing it or feeling like they have to fix it. What it looks like to hold a healthy boundary when their partner's breaking down in front of them. What it looks like to actually step towards their partner in curiosity rather than walk straight out the door because it's all too much. So, what it looks like to slow down sex, be present with a partner, look at them in the eyes. All of these things are learnt once you've got buy-in. Yeah.
Monica, that I am so grateful. And I appreciate sometimes I think the story of my life is a little learning is a dangerous thing. But I sometimes go where angels fear to tread. But I am so thankful for some of the things you're saying. I'm just going to close this section out. I'm going to have you jump over to the other podcast called Pastors on Porn, and we're going to riff a little bit about some of Jesus' teaching on sex in the church. And so if you're still interested, you can hop over to that podcast. So anyways, thank you guys for joining us. And I know you've learned something today. And so checking out just quickly that the gal was Esther Perel. And Terry Real.
Yeah, fantastic work on intimacy avoidance.
All right. Thank you again. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.